Today is Monday, April 20th, and I'm here with Richard, Florida. It's about 1 o'clock Miami time. Richard, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to speak with me today.
It's great to be with you. We're at our condominium in Miami Beach, so not too far from where you are. We had planned to go back to Toronto. In fact, I'm on sabbatical this term, and I was working on a documentary series for PBS, pitching it, but developing it with their support on cities, a 4-part series. And of course, then this hit. And changed my work really to think about the relationship between pandemics and cities. So we decided to stay. And in fact, if we even wanted to go back to Toronto, we couldn't get a flight. Flights have been canceled now, I think through all of April and part of May. So we're here for the time being, which has been a not horrible. I mean, to be honest, it's been if you're going to spend time battling this virus or dealing with the pandemic, Miami Beach has turned out to be a pretty good place to do it.
Yeah, not being so far away from you, I would agree. I would agree. So it's early on still. We're a few weeks into this in the US, but have you given any thoughts about how the recent pandemic may influence the future world of architecture, or particularly the future design of cities?
Well, unfortunately, too much for all of you listening or watching. As soon as this struck, which is now about, I got wind of this maybe 8 weeks ago, but I was still going to my local flywheel spinning class until about 5 or 6 weeks ago. And that's when it really dawned on a lot of us that this was going to be quite serious. What's interesting is someone who spent 3 or 4 decades studying urbanism, I never thought twice, that's 2 fingers, twice about pandemics. I had heard about the Spanish flu. And in fact, I've since learned, my parents were born in 1921 and 1926. They're about the youngest members of their respective families. There were 7 siblings in each. Tons of their siblings were born during the Spanish flu. Never mentioned it. Moreover, I was born in the pandemic. So I was born in 1957, so you know how old I am. My parents never mentioned it. Like, that killed 100,000 Americans, a lot of children. So it's really interesting to me as an urbanist. I've never thought about it. Now, of course, I've been developing a lot of writing. I went back to writing at City Lab. I've been writing for Fast Company. I'm developing a big feature essay for The Atlantic, the magazine, for the June issue, which means it'll come out in May. So yeah, a lot. I think a bunch of things will happen. One, I think it will change. Oh, so I should say this. In the long run, great cities will survive. New York and Miami and Toronto and London and Rome and Madrid, and we can go on, Tokyo and Singapore. They've survived far worse than this. London survived the cholera epidemic, the Blitz, there was the Black Plagues in Europe. Through it all, cities and urbanization have been the greater force than infectious disease. That said, I think it will change architecture and design of cities at a more micro level. I think for people with families, and I have 2 little kids, I had kids late in life, I think they're going to be scared of cities. I hear it from my friends in New York. I've never heard them say this. I want a backyard. I want a play set. I might move to Hudson. I might move to the Hamptons. I might move to Miami. I had one friend say I might move to Charlotte. I think lots of people will do that. I think for young people, though, who are risk oblivious, cities will still be very attractive. And in fact, throughout the course of history, we found that in the wave of pandemics, ambitious people or people who want to move ahead come to cities. That was true in cholera. That was true in the Black Plagues. That was true in 1918. People who are ambitious were drawn to the higher wages and greater opportunities of cities, even with the risk. In fact, the wages of people went up a lot. I think that one silver lining could be that if, with the coming trauma to commercial real estate, as people are going to be scared to go to offices and office towers, go to co-working, they're going to be scared to go to co-working spaces. So with the retail apocalypse, even becoming more apocalyptic, now even Neiman Marcus has said it's going to file for bankruptcy, a pretty successful retailer. Cities may become more affordable again. And, artists and creatives who are gentrified out of cities may find that they can go, if they want to go back. I'm not saying they want to go back. They might find the city to be boring, because it was become too generic. But if they want to go back, they will. So I think there'll be push and pull factors. Some will pull some people out to the suburbs. Some will push some people back to cities. The precise balancing will be how long this takes. If it's over in 6 months, I think there'll be very little. If it takes 2 years, I think there'll be more. In terms of architecture, I think it's going to be tall towers. Big tall towers are going to be scary for some people. People are going to be scared to be in elevators, for sure. I know I am. I live in a small building, but I always wait till the elevator's clear. Um, and I remember living in NYU housing, like, whew, when that elevator was packed, and I don't think people are going to get in that. I think, technology, for a long time, we've talked about building technology. I used to teach at Carnegie Mellon. We had a really good group of people on that. I think this idea of sensors and smart technology and even thermal sensors, I see at Whole Foods now, they're putting in sensors for the workers, and Amazon's doing it into their warehouses. I think technologies that sense health and wellness and that enable to protect yourself are going to be bigger. So I think this integration of technology and architecture, we call it smart cities or building technology, I think that'll be a big trend too.
So, I mean, you've covered a lot of ground, and I'm curious, just as a follow-up, when you speak about maybe some people moving, you spoke in both directions, some people moving out of the city, and then that might allow others to move in. I was curious if you think in this wave of possible decentralization, there might be alternative models that emerge that are not, let's say, the American suburb of the post-war, but that we might be able to do it better. Have you thought about that at all?
Well, you and I were talking, and I was saying one of the things I feel very good about in Miami Beach, which is kind of one of these suburbs. It's not a big dense city like New York. It's not a traditional suburb. Is that I can get delivery of grocery within a day or two. One of my children was sick. They have allergies. CVS delivered within 2 hours via Instacart. I can get pretty good food delivered from major restaurants, even as far away as downtown Miami, never mind the good restaurants on the beach. So I think that that's a benefit. If you're going to be stuck inside, to be able to get stuff delivered is going to be a real benefit. And so I think people are going to crave that, and they might not move too far out. On the other hand, I think there'll be some people who say, I want to live in a more rural area. And I don't think just the woods, places like Hudson, New York, or lovely parts of Colorado, or parts of California outside of Los Angeles or San Francisco. Americans have always had this kind of hippie thing. I was watching this documentary about the band the other night, Once We Were Brothers. Robbie Robertson stars in it, who's from Toronto. I actually met Robbie. But they talked about moving to Woodstock. And it wasn't just like them in Woodstock. Bob Dylan was there. There were great artists there. Michael Lang went to Woodstock, not to make a festival, the promoter of Woodstock, but to open a recording studio out there. I think some of that will happen. I think one of the things that might be troubling to me is we have many great suburbs that grew up on transit hubs. Not so much here in Miami, but in New York, all of the, like Montclair, close to where I grew up in New Jersey, South Orange, you have so many of these lovely places, and so many in Westchester County, in other parts of the New York metropolitan area. I think people are going to be scared of trains and transit. So I don't know if they're going to command the value. I think there still be lovely places to live, but yeah, to answer your question specifically, I think places that provide goods and services, that have retail, that have stuff that can be delivered, that have some vibrancy, and maybe even if you can't go to the store. Another thing I like about being here, when I go out for a walk, I see a lot of people, and I see a lot of people on bikes. That gives me a kind of sense of connecting with humanity, even if I'm not talking to them or interacting directly. So I think there'll be something about seeing people in your day-to-day life, even if you don't interact with them directly. So yeah, it gives architects and urban designers and urban planners a kind of new canvas. I do think the real key to this new canvas, we've talked a lot about the Green New Deal, sustainability, resiliency, inclusivity. I think all of those things are critical. I wrote a whole book called The New Urban Crisis. But I think health and safety are going to be top of mind. So for us in this profession of architecture, urban design, and urbanism, I think putting health and safety first and taking all those other concerns for resilience and climate change and inclusivity and just saying they're part of the solution, they're part of recovery, but they're not the short term. I think people are going to really care about being safe and healthy, wellness, being safe for them and their family. So I think that's going to be the big driver of the changes.
So maybe just one last question, because you spoke about the question of the green city or the sustainable movement. And there you're talking, most times we're arguing for density, basically. You're arguing for a more compact city, right? But then the recent pandemics have caused us to think about the kind of less dense city, right? So those two seem to be contradictory. Do you find ways that you can reconcile them?
Yeah, I think that the deal with density will be short-lived, and it's going to manifest itself mainly as a fear of giant buildings, office towers. I think office towers are in for a tough go, and they were already. I think the move to remote work and people working from home is going to be here to stay. Uh, I think people are going to be darn scared of elevators, so that relates to that. And I think people are going to be scared of transit. Going to last 2 or 3 years, and then that's going to be over. And density will return. But I've never been a huge fan of hyperdensity. I've always thought that there was a sweet spot, like Jane Jacobs kind of density, Soho density, Greenwich Village density, Miami Beach density. I could go San Francisco density. I was never a big fan, although many other economists were, of kind of the hyper towers, like Singapore or Seoul kind of Tokyo kind of density. It's okay, but it's not my cup of tea. I kind of think of those tower complexes as like vertical suburbs where people go up and down in elevators and they go down to a little mall. We have them in Toronto too. They go down to a little coffee shop and mall right in the building and they never leave. I like the kind of street level density and the activation of the street. I think that will be better. And I think, there's a short and a long term. I don't think pandemics have ever really dampened. Now, the Black Plagues may have dampened this for a while, maybe even a century, but that's a long time. But over the long haul of history, we become denser, more clustered, more vibrant. And that's because that's a fundamental economic driver. So look, there may be a short-term adaptation and a little bit of fear, but in the long run, we'll get used. And I think the benefits of density, not only to the economy, but to living a life in relative quarantine, there are benefits to density. I know, my friends who live in suburbs are having a real hard time getting stuff delivered. They have to go to the grocery store. They have to go to the drugstore. They have to get in their car. Density brings some benefits too. You could ask about my routine. That's the only other thing that you mentioned.
Oh,
So you would ask like how my routine differs.
yeah. Well, if the events had changed somehow, the structure of your day, I think you alluded to that a little earlier, but if you'd like to elaborate, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. I'm an introvert and an intellectual, an academic. Remains to be seen whether I'm an intellectual. So I kind of live in isolation anyway. I've never liked going to the office. I've always worked at home a lot, even in the days of like really crappy AOL dial-up. I've always liked to be secluded. Even though I'm a public speaker, I'm very shy. I'm shy in big gatherings. I avoid meetings. I'm somebody who likes to do work. So in that regard, my life hasn't changed that much. I mean, we have 2 little kids. So, my wife has shouldered a bit bigger burden than I. But yeah, I've had to help out more there. They're like me. When we say they have to go to school, they start to yell and scream. But then when we say it's online school, they go, yay. I miss going to spinning class. That's about and maybe going for a walk to the coffee shop to break up my day. If I wasn't so nervous, I'm a road cyclist too, but I'm really scared. Not so much from catching the bug. I'm really scared that if I clumsily fell, I would not only have to go to the emergency room, I would take a doctor's attention. So I've been walking but if I could get back on my road bike, that would compensate. I was never much for going out to dinner. And as long as I could make food, I have a grill here, or get food from one big benefit is getting food from a good restaurant delivered to me. Wow, that's like a game changer. I've been healthier. I stopped drinking. I lost weight. I take more vitamins. And I think that's going to stick. I think that I'm going to stay healthier. I don't think I'm going to, I might have a glass of wine, but not that I ever was a super big drink, but I think the healthy lifestyle, especially because I'm a little older now. I'm more focused in my writing and that's probably therapy. I get to bed early. So I think the biggest change for me, the other thing is this. I do like travel. I do like going to cities. I do like giving speeches and meeting with people, but it's probably better for me to hang around with my kids. So I think one big benefit going forward will be this. We're going to be able to Zoom more and not have to travel as much. I think online education is going to be good too. I think that I'm not a great classroom teacher. I don't know why. There are other people like me who are also good public speakers who say they're not great classroom teachers. But I think I'm pretty good at this. So maybe online teaching and the ability not to teach like a semester class. Like I don't like semesters because every week it seems, I don't know what it is. It seems not disruptive. It seems to lack continuity. The one time I taught an intensive, which was like 5 days straight for like 6 hours a day, I loved it. This summer, the University of Toronto asked me to teach a week-long intensive, which I think is going to be online. I don't think we're going to be able to meet in person. I think I'm going to like that. So I think from a teaching point of view, I'm actually going to like teaching better, and maybe not just like it better. Maybe I'll be better at online learning. But yeah, in general, it hasn't changed my life too much because I was one of those people who lived a semi-quarantine life. I think if I was an extrovert, I'd be going crazy. But I'm an introvert, and I'm perfectly content to stay around the house as long as I can get out. I mean, the other thing is as long as I can get out and exercise. So the other thing, sorry to run on about this, and this may be true for other people, weather may matter more. You know, I've never been a big like Sunbelt, Frostbelt guy. I've always liked Frostbelt cities. But in this quarantine kind of lockdown life, weather might matter more. What I keep thinking is, in the Spanish flu, really in 1918, the city that grew the most between 1910 and 1930 was Los Angeles. I keep having in my mind that, you know, maybe people left to go to Los Angeles. Well, there was a car and once the California was booming, but maybe they saw a healthier lifestyle out there, you know, with sun and air. So maybe at the margin, weather will become more important. I said the other day, you're going to find this funny. I said something like to my wife, you know, Scottsdale seems pretty good these days. Well, would I have, not that Scottsdale isn't a perfectly lovely place, but for me to say that, it means that something is going on in my head about outside and wellness. And I know I'm not the only one because I've heard other people say that. You know, I want warmth, I want sun, I want to be able to go outside. When you can't use those indoor great amenities of a big city, can't go to restaurants, can't go to bars, can't go to theater, somehow the allure of the outside becomes. So I think that might change at the margin. But then again, you know, my big fear is that we'll all end up forgetting. You know, we'll end up like me, you know, with having aunts and uncles born during the Spanish flu, me being born during the pandemic of 1977 and never even realizing these things were important. So that's my biggest worry.
Well, I think you raise a lot of excellent points as always, and I think that I'm left with the thought of optimism actually in speaking with you, and I'm really grateful for these virtual platforms because they do give us new abilities to connect, and I'm hoping that since you spend at least for now half of your time in Florida, that we will have more opportunities to continue the conversation in the physical world.
Yeah, before I sign off, let me say that I'm not an anxious person. I had a lot of anxiety. Now I'm pretty much over that. We were actually able to get tested. One of our kids, you heard me coughing. We both have allergies, but her cough was a little worse. So we just wanted to make sure. But here we got a test, negative. We got an antibody test, negative. A guy came with a hazmat suit, like we had to meet him in the parking lot. It was very fascinating. But I was very anxious. The point is, I was very anxious and scared. And I think if I was anxious and scared, someone who does not suffer from anxiety disorder, I can only imagine what someone who has more anxiety than me was going through. So while I am very optimistic, I think I just want folks to know I am optimistic, and I think you know, we could come through this if we're vigilant, if we're smart, if we listen and pay attention to public health and social distancing, even as we come out of lockdown. You know, instead of millions of deaths, we could have tens of thousands. Not every death is a horrible tragedy, but from the standpoint of public health, we could have something that's a very good outcome. But it's extremely painful and extremely anxiety producing. So I'm optimistic, but realize that there's, and you know, things like mental health, depression, alcohol and substance abuse, domestic abuse, spousal abuse have all gone up. I mean, we believe have all gone up during this pandemic. So I'm optimistic, but realistic that we'll see better days ahead of us. We got to get through this time too.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that perspective. Actually, I think maybe many of us have gone through that.
Great talking. And we'll meet in person sometime.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.